Hello, everybody. This is Karl from Superpowers, and I am super excited today because I have a great guest. I have somebody really new to me. Her name is Mary Reed, and Mary Reed is a mystic. And Mary Reed had absolutely no intention of being a mystic in her life. And so I'm excited to introduce you to her and just let you hear her story and how this all came about for her. And I'm just going to step right over to Mary here. So, Mary, hang on one second. Let me get you going. And there is Mary Reed. Hello, Mary.
Hello, hello. It's so nice to be here. Thank you, Karl.
Oh, well, we love having you here. This is actually a real treat. And I loved our chat the other day, and so I'm excited for everybody to get to know you and hear your story a little bit. And so I want to just jump right in. And I just want to start with, who was Mary Reed before all of this happened?
Oh, that's such a big cosmic question, isn't it? So we all want to know, who am I?
Well,
Uh,
maybe less in the cosmic sense and more
I'll
in the
narrow it
3D
down.
sense.
Yeah, I'll see if I can narrow it down a little bit. So, well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be on your show. This is really a delight. I'm really thrilled to be here. And I'm actually in America doing a little tour, which I usually do during the summer times because I live in northern India in a remote Buddhist nunnery at the foothills of the Himalaya mountains. But before I was leading a mostly monastic life, prior to the last 5 years, I was an executive in Washington, D.C., and I was a global program director working on healthcare partnerships in Africa and America. So that's what I was doing before then. I was in Washington for 17 years, always in sort of an executive role there in clinical research and then nutrition and healthcare programs. So it's been a dramatic shift in my life going to live in India. I've traveled the world, and India was never, ever, ever on my list because, ironically, I thought it was too spiritually woo-woo for me. And then that's where the doors led me to when I started having these mystical abilities. So that's what I was doing before then.
So, I think that's funny, and it's actually very true to who you are, because prior to all this happening, um, spiritual realm and religious study, or just religions in general, weren't really on your radar screen, were they?
At all. In fact, I never had any interest in religion or spirituality at all. I thought it was really okay. The truth is, I wanted to be an opera singer or a backup dancer for Michael Jackson. So that was my level of like what life should be about, like dancing or singing or something like that. So spirituality, I just thought honestly was very uncool. And I never had a lot of questions. I've never read the Bible. I've never read the Quran or studied Buddhist texts, even though I live in a Buddhist nunnery. But obviously, the universe had different plans, or I made different plans for myself before I came here more appropriately. And about 15 and a half years ago, I began to have really deeply profound visions and insights, all related to God and Jesus and Buddha and angels and this sort of stuff. And I kept trying to sort of live my normal life while holding all of this really profound information. And then eventually, my world just sort of tipped upside down and the balance shifted dramatically. And all of my normalcy started just falling away. I was always really successful. I was very successful in my jobs and relationship and family and home and community. And then around 2009, all of that normalcy just started falling away one by one by one by one, while at the same time all of this spiritual stuff was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually I had two worlds that I couldn't figure out how to live in. My normal world, nothing was working anymore, and the spiritual world, I didn't know what to do with all of this stuff because I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know how to hold it, and I really didn't know what to do with it. And so when that happened, I actually, on March 23rd, 2011, I had a very serious suicide attempt. And I took 97 prescription pain and sleeping pills with 3 glasses of wine. And then I laid down and said my prayers and just thought that that was really it. And then 2 days later, I just woke up. I woke up on my own, all by myself. I was in excruciating pain and I had no ability to control my motor skills, but I was alive. And so it was that miracle that really, and it truly was a miracle, that really forced me into finally a state of surrender, to stop trying to sort of figure everything out and make a plan and fix everything. And I just sat on the edge of my couch, completely numb, crying when I needed to cry. And I kept saying this prayer, okay, if there's something you need me to do, you're going to have to help me do it because I can't be the project manager for my life anymore. I quit. I just quit. Honestly,
Yeah.
that's what it was.
Right.
I just stopped. And
Yeah.
immediately, door after door after door just started flying open. I didn't even really have to push the door. It just kind of went open. And
Right.
it was those doors that led me to living in a Buddhist nunnery in India.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to go back just a second and ask you to tell us just a little bit about um, what these experiences you were having were like, and just kind of give me a sense. I don't know what it felt like, what you were experiencing. Was it a visual thing? Did it have, sort of a dream kind of quality to it? Was it a full experience, or what was it exactly, that you were going through that started this ball rolling?
hmm Well, in the beginning, um, so first let me say that most of my insights, about 90% of them, relate to the origins of something that we think of as divine truth or an issue important to the discussion of divine truth. So, for example, the origins of what we might consider the universe, or the origins of thought, the origins of fear, the origins of Christianity, the origins of Buddhism, etc. And the reason why I can go right to the origins of those really profound fundamental truths is because I have no religious background. And so I have no filter. I have no expectation of what kind of information should come. I don't even know what kind of questions to ask because I don't know anything about religion or spirituality. So because of that, I am a very clean and clear vessel to and through which information can come. And when this all first started, I was really busy. At that time, I was a clinical research director in respiratory medicine. And so I was traveling around a lot. I had this massive program that I was directing. And I began to hear a voice. And this voice inside me just kept saying, in a very clear, heavy kind of way, you're supposed to be doing something very important. And I, of course, thought I was already doing something very important. And so I
Yeah.
kept trying to ignore it, but it just kept coming. And it's not a normal voice like, somebody saying, "Hey, it's more like a vibration. Like, when a bass singer hits a really low note and you kind of
Right.
feel that after sound vibration, that's
Yeah.
what it felt like.
Uh-huh.
And so the more I tried to ignore it, the more persistent and pronounced it got. And so I started having it on airplanes and in elevators while I was in meetings. Like it just kept on and on. It wouldn't leave me alone. Truly, it wouldn't leave me alone.
Yeah.
And then there was sort of a little series of events that added to that about 6 months after the voice started. And so I went to see a friend of mine who's a psychotherapist to undergo hypnosis and see if I could dig a little deeper to find out what this was. And when I was on the airplane going to have that that hypnosis session, I was living in Washington, D.C., and I was flying to Little Rock, Arkansas to see this friend. And I was trying to think, what could be so important that something otherworldly keeps nudging me to try to pay attention? And I figured that it had to be something very simple because there was nothing really in me that was kind of bubbling up or feeling unusual. I wasn't finding myself curious about anything or chronically thinking about something. So I thought it had to be something pretty simple. So I got it in my head that it must be that I probably know something like a simple secret to purifying water. that you can imagine if I knew something that simple, then I could help billions of people in developing countries, and that would be very important. And that's probably what I know. And so that was the level of my naivete going into that hypnosis session. And ultimately, what happened instead was that within minutes of being, actually within seconds of being put under, I found myself in the body of Jesus at his moment of crucifixion, hanging on the cross, being dragged through a courtyard. And then I suddenly, in that instant, as soon as I realized where I was, somehow I knew everything about the evolution of humanity over untold millennia up to that point. I knew it with crystal clarity, and I could see exactly what led to that moment, which was not about everything that we learned, like the betrayal of a disciple or people who were threatened by my presence or anything like that. I saw very clearly the ideology and the mindset that had been cultivated and perpetuated for centuries. And so everything leading up to that moment, and then understanding the world, everything that was happening in that moment, and then watching the evolution of mankind from that moment to current day. And so it was essentially learning about the world before Christianity, with the birth of Christianity and the evolution of Christianity from the vantage point of Christ. And that's the kind of nature of all of the insights that happened to me. That weekend, I actually had 2 days in a row, more than 3 hours each day, so nearly 7 hours altogether.
Wow.
And both days going into these really heavy scenes. The second day was a meeting with a godlike being about the conflict nature of our world and how we built it in that way, and the participation of religion in that conflict structure. And so everything is really weighty. And so that weekend just opened the floodgates to my metaphysical abilities. And then I started to have these things spontaneously happen just while I was walking or working or
Right.
right before I went to sleep or in quiet times around my house or
Yeah.
various things. And so it was that kind of huge understanding of what our world is about that I had to then walk through our world with.
Right.
And my work at that time in Washington, D.C., and then in Africa, everything was sort of mirrored against that knowing. And that in part helped me feel a little bit more insane because
I
I
guess. Yeah.
realized just what we've been doing and how we live our conditioned life here.
Right.
And so to answer your question about what happens, like what I experienced. So in that moment, of course, that was under hypnosis, so it's even a deeper sort of induced depth.
Hmm.
Um, in that, and I could tell you that it doesn't matter if it's under hypnosis or not. I've only had 2 times of hypnosis with that, but the rest in waking or near sleep states, it is a purely embodied state. There's no awareness of myself as in this physical form. It is
Hmm.
beyond the physical, and so it is a fully embodied um, transformation. I'm in a completely different place, living that scene or that moment entirely and knowing instantly everything I'm supposed to know in that context of whatever scene I am in the mind of Buddha or the body of Jesus. Many times I've been taken up into the body of Jesus, incorporated into his body and then into the Christ consciousness, and then
Right.
viewing world issues or historical issues or different energies from that vantage point and living those energies. So, literally, as, for example, the energies of fear, and knowing exactly what the basis of that is in an individual and also cosmically from an entirely planetary view. There's a
Yeah.
planetary view. So it's a completely different kind of full knowing and embodiment away from a physical awareness. There's no perception of this kind of reality in those moments at all.
Right. Right.
And I also have, and I should mention that all of this is completely uncontrolled. Not all of it. Probably 95% of it is uncontrolled. There's very few instances in which I can ask a question and then go get an answer, or transport to another reality and get an answer. So I can also have these experiences of just in the energy state that we all exist in, the energy field that we exist in but cannot perceive through our normal senses. I can also go to that field without any perception senses and see exactly what's really happening in this present moment around me and within me and with other people.
Wow, that is actually hugely amazing. And the experiences that you've had, I mean, it because they're different for everyone. You
Yeah,
know, and I suspect that we may have, you know, closet mystics out there, or people
sure.
who were in the position that you were originally, which is things were happening, you didn't understand them, you didn't really have any context for understanding it, and your biggest wish probably was that it would just go away, and leave you alone. And I think it's interesting too that things seem to be brought to you. You don't go out and find them. They're just it's just bringing it to you.
Yeah, that's right. But I should say I didn't actually ever want it to go away. I wanted to know what to do with it. It's
Ah,
like, I'm happy. I don't know how many times I said this prayer. I'm really happy to do whatever you want me to do. Just tell me what it is. And
right.
so there's been this whole like kind of having to put the puzzle pieces together on my own because I
Mm-hmm.
can't just go and say, okay, so how should I do blah, 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 or what do you want me to do with blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Somehow I've had to figure that out on my own. But I know, and this happens every single time that I give talks, is that afterwards, so people will buy my book and then they line up to meet me and I sign their books. And every single time, there are many people in that line that whispered to me, I've been having these events myself and I
Uh-huh.
didn't know what to do with it. And so I've never told anybody. And
Mm.
I too thought I was insane or that these were hallucinations.
Yeah.
I get it all the time. And the near death community, people who have near death experiences, they're like huge. There's so many people that have those experiences and they
Right.
don't know how to talk about it. They don't know
Yes.
what to do with it. And they believe that people are going to think that they're crazy or that it
Uh-huh.
was just a hallucination or whatever. So
Right.
there's so many people holding their secrets. And these people have mystic wisdom. This is
Yeah.
the direct embodied knowing experience, which is completely different than the sort of intellectualized understanding of teachings. They're two completely different worlds. And I know so many people who say once, that they maybe have studied for years and years and years, and then they have a metaphysical experience,
Mm-hmm.
and it's nothing compared to what they thought in their sort of intellectualized understanding. So
Right.
it
Yeah.
is a really different kind of experience, and it's one that you can tell people about, but you can't really tell it in a way that people experience it. And
Right.
that's actually when I wrote my book is called Unwitting Mystic, and the way that I wrote my book was very intentional because I had been trying to write for many years. I like to write, I like to craft a story um, sort of creatively, and I kept trying to write narrative about what each experience meant. And
Right.
it was like felt like I was choking each time I was starting to write it. And then I realized that I don't actually need to say what the events are about. I just need to tell people that these things happened.
Right.
And
Uh-huh.
so in my book, I give narrative about my personal life and the journey, and I alternate that with the actual experiences as they happened.
Right.
And what I realize and the audience of readers has responded to me with is that that's exactly the way that people need to hear it. And then it can mean to them whatever it means to them. It can
Yeah.
resonate with them in whatever way it touches them.
Sure.
And I don't have to tell them what to believe about it. And so that's worked really well. And anybody who's had these experiences, I would really encourage them to think along just those lines. We don't have to tell people that they need to believe it. We
Mm-hmm.
just need to open up about our secrets and tell people that these things have happened. And that in and of itself really creates open doors with other people.
Right. That was a recurring theme at IONS. We were just at the IONS
Mm.
2016 conference down in Florida and live streaming that. And they have a day where they have scientific researchers and they have nurses and medical community people come in and talk about it. And there's not a container yet for people
Right.
to understand what that experience is and what's going on. And there's an awful lot of push toward that it's a physical occurrence versus it's a spiritual occurrence or an adventure in consciousness. And And so what you're saying is really true, that the people who have the experiences, they hang on to it, and even people there, the ones who are now speaking freely about and talking about what the impact has been on their life, say that at first, the first few people they talked to said they were crazy. In fact, one person whose presentation I loved, Alan Huguenos, who is not only in the Navy, or formerly in the Navy, but also he's a physicist, and he had a motorcycle accident, and he was telling the doctor about his experience, and the doctor did think he was crazy and was going to commit him and actually keep him there and probably start him on drugs and all that to get him, whip him back into shape. And so, it's difficult to understand, especially from a third dimensional perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what do you think? So first of all, let me say, I'm actually giving 2 talks this year to groups of psychotherapists because an important part of my story was how many times I was rejected or dismissed because of telling people my story in a professional setting. So I really did think I was going insane, or I desperately wanted help to figure out what was happening so I didn't have to hold everything by myself. And I saw more than 40 practitioners of psychotherapists, regular doctors, acupuncturists, Reiki practitioners, shamans. Like, the list is endless. And I saw them in many places around the world as I traveled. Mm-hmm. Right. And I wanted somebody to help me hold it. I wanted somebody to tell me what's happening here. And people were pretty dismissive pretty quickly, especially in the psychotherapy realm.
Yes.
And so I'm actually giving 2 talks to groups of psychotherapists, and the talks are about because psychotherapists themselves don't have the resources to know how to help people who are having these awakening experiences, but they're happening more and more and more and more. So I'm keen on trying to open the doors for psychotherapists, regular physicians, anybody, Reiki practitioners, everybody, so they themselves can get resources to help patients, but also that patients have permission and trust to be able to talk about those things. So the talks I'm having, in one talk in particular, the talk is about the difference between hallucinations and divine apparitions, and how the sort of disturbed mind talks entirely about fear and mistrust and insanity, and the mystic in their experiences, and I'm sure that the near-death experience community would validate this, it is entirely about love and simplicity and trust and openness. Yes. And it's a completely different kind of experience. And so I'm really happy that I think there's more and more and more discussions now in the service world to help people start coping with some of these awakening experiences.
Right.
And I would be interested in, if you guys were talking about this at the near-death experience, at this IONS conference, what a container would actually look like, right? Yeah. If there's, what would we wish to see? I mean, I could only talk about it from my own perspective, but I'm curious to know if they talked about that there.
They didn't actually talk about that there, but you know what it is? It probably is less a container, and it's more a shift in perspective. And that shift in perspective is that consciousness creates form and not the other way around. Because when you're coming at things from the perspective of that this is all here, the physical realm is here and present because it's a construction of consciousness, versus that consciousness is erupting from an already existing physical form. It changes how you filter those things and how you receive them. And I think that probably more than anything, that shift is something that would be really, really helpful. And it's also something that's happening more and more. People are coming to that awareness, and people like Dr. Eben Alexander and former neurosurgeon who is now telling everybody that exact thing. And also people like Alan Huguenot, who's a physicist, and he's using quantum electrodynamics to prove that consciousness exists outside of the physical realm, and not only exists outside of it, but is actually responsible for the existence of the physical realm. So, but I think that's where it goes, and that's what the conversation was. There was a lot of that this year at it, and
That's so exciting.
it really is. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
But even in the sort of ordinary conversations with people, like I would dearly love to have a conversation about quantum physics with Alan, and
We'll
to
make that
talk about
happen. Yeah.
we'll make that happen.
Yes.
But even apart from that, if you think about like the audiences that come to hear my talks, when there's marketing for my event that is around the question of whether modern mysticism is a real thing, and what kind of people will come to hear that kind of talk. It's shocking. It's truly shocking the number of sort of ordinary people that know somehow, even if it's against their religious teachings, or if they are sort of in a world that not all people all around them aren't quite believers in that sort of thing. They really do have a deep curiosity, and it's shocking to me the number of older people who really kind of have that sense of, you know what, I think there's more to what's happening than
Right.
what we've been taught in our
Yes.
Christian church or the synagogue or the temples or whatever. And so many times my audiences are filled with older people, like literally the average age is above 80. And
Oh.
they're really curious, and they're deeply respectful of what the knowledge is that comes forward, and you can see that they're like, yeah, I kind of thought that was the real thing, as
Right.
as we're talking. So it's a beautiful thing to see. There's a great curiosity. I think that people just naturally are kind of coming into this, that it's not as we thought it was.
Right.
And in
Yeah.
that, sort of just subtle even awakening, there's more opportunity for greater understandings to come, including how they've been conditioned in their other beliefs, and that now they can sort of open up a little bit. So it's
Right.
really breathtaking to see.
Yeah, yeah. I think just big transformation happening. And, one of the other talks that happened there that was fascinating, and I think you'll enjoy this too, is there was a woman, Maggie Callanan, and she's a hospice worker. And so she has the opportunity to be with people who are, right at the precipice all the time. And it just is really pretty interesting, the story and their awareness as it's opening up, and what they're seeing and what they're starting to connect to the other side. And that's actually a wonderful talk too, and in line with what you're saying. Here are people who are now they're more open, and they're starting to receive, and they're starting to make that transition. Fascinating.
Yeah, that's really phenomenal. Wow, what a beautiful position to be in. But then you go to the other extreme, down to sort of the youth of today, and we're seeing a whole new world coming in, ushered in by the mindset of the youth, that are much more collaborative, much more harmonious in their mindset, and using social media to promote that kind of thing, and they're not even so much curious as like, yeah, why would we believe anything like that?
Right.
They're less likely to be conditioned, because they are already coming in not buying into old paradigms.
Right. Yes.
And then we have the people like Akian Kramaric, and this boy who's the subject of Heaven is for Real or something. That I don't remember who they are, but lots of stories now about youth that are having the direct experiences that come in and say, actually, there's beauty to be found in getting outside of this sort of focus on this life, and
Right.
they're ushering in a completely different way of seeing the world.
Yes.
I absolutely adore that.
Yeah, I do too. A wholly new perspective, and one that's more connected to who we really are than connected to this manifestation of consciousness here in the third dimensional realm.
Yeah. I think we're going to see a lot more of youth teachers coming to the forefront that are not talking about, espousing their understandings of ancient teachings, but really talking about their current day knowing.
Right.
And there's a real power to that, especially when it comes from a youthful energy.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm so excited about it.
I know. So,
Truly.
Mary, tell me a little bit now about how you are applying all that has transpired over the last 15 years, and then just what you do with that.
Yeah. Well, I've been living at the nunnery for the better part of 5 years now. And it took me getting into that nunnery to finally just stop and uh, let community around me and the spiritual space around me just hold me for a bit, and
Hmm.
then let all the pieces start coming together. Because previously there was, sort of this piece over here and this piece over here and this piece over here, and I didn't understand how everything fit together. Dr. Rudy Bauer at the Washington Center for Consciousness Studies, who I highly recommend, by the way, is in Washington, D.C.
Uh-huh.
He was one of the psychotherapists that I finally ended up working with, and he helped me understand what was really happening. And that was that he said, I'm not only am I not crazy, I just happen to have a really profound gift of insight that most people will study or meditate and train to go from A to B to C to get to the Z of spiritual wisdom. And I just happen to jump from A to Z. But
Yeah.
the problem is Z has no context for me because
Hmm.
I don't know B, C, D, etc. So much of my time over the last 5 years has been letting those sort of in between pieces, come into my awareness and understanding. And that took probably about a couple of years
Hmm.
really to have the time to let that all come together. And then it was in the writing of my book and finally just telling my story,
Right.
finding my voice and my courage to come out as a mystic, knowing that it was going to be, I'm going to have to do this by myself because I don't have any teachers here in this earthly realm. And so getting to the first step for me was just coming out.
Uh-huh.
And it was literally figuring out, how does it feel to use my voice? And how does it feel to say these words? And how do people hear me?
Hmm.
And what are people's questions? How do they respond? What is the relationship now with people?
Right.
And so for the first 2 years, that was my journey. It was really the sort of coming out and making my own path and seeing where that was going to lead me. And it is only now this year, this is the third summer now that I've come out to tour. And it is only this year now that I actually know exactly where all of this has brought me to. And so this year on my tour, I'm talking about specifically exactly what is divine love. We talk a lot about that love is the answer, that people, when they come back from the divine realms, always talk about that it's all about love. And many of the teachings espouse love. You see it on every meme, but nobody talks about exactly what love is. And in fact, what I watch is the application of something that we think is love is actually a paradigm of separation that is about self-denial or self-rejection.
Hmm.
And that is that we think that when we want to sort of stop or do away with our fear and our judgment and all of these things that we consider negative, we're actually employing a model of one part of us making another part of us try to go away. We want the good to make the bad disappear. And that's actually a dualistic separation mindset. And so in my tour this year, I'm talking about understanding that first and foremost, that what we've been doing in our storytelling, in our songwriting, in our movie writing, and the way that we've set up all of the systems of our world is actually a form of self-rejection that keeps us in a separation consciousness. And that what actual love is, the place from which we begin, that which is our life force, is something different. And that is that it is a state of being unconditional, a state of equality and equanimity, a state of freedom for everything to be as it is, a state of unified oneness with all that is within us, what we consider good or bad, and that it is a full acceptance of what is in this present moment. And so it is that story that I'm talking about now,
Hmm.
and helping people sort of come to a different understanding about how our world is shifting as we move into a world of more unconditional love. Now we see this start threading through a lot of our teachings about
Right.
unconditional love. We start seeing now all around us, we can look at the last 100 years, all the movement towards equality. That's not
Mm-hmm.
an accident as we're in an awakening world, because we're getting back to that state of equanimity. And, many of our teachings and conversations now are about a freedom of expression for all beings. And we're seeing that so beautifully right now in our world with the transgendered community, really pushing those buttons about acceptance and freedom to express who we are as we are. And then, of course, the idea of oneness is threaded through lots of teachings and sort of a pervasive teaching now as well. And then people like Eckhart Tolle have made a whole industry out of the presence of now, the
Right.
acceptance of what
Yeah.
is in this moment. And so these pieces of our teachings and our that are coming out now in our awakening world is exactly why we're learning about these, because those are the components of the state of real love. And so that's what I talk about this year. And that really is the basis. Everything that I've learned from all different viewpoints have all brought me to this core understanding. And when we get to these, to be that state of divine love, and that is the state that we let everything in our reflective world meet in us, then we really transform and transmute the energies more to a state of love around us as well as within us.
I actually love that you're saying all that, and I hate to keep having to go back to my only real point of reference on this right now, but
It's okay.
that's a big message in the near-death experience,
Mhm.
is that what they experience there is, in fact, unconditional love. And one of the things that they talk about, and I think that it's really interesting, relevant to this, is they say how they had things in their lives that they didn't like, that they wish they had done better, and they were worried that there was going to be some sort of judgment about that.
Yeah.
And they get there and they realize there's no judgment about it at all. And in fact, some of them are talking about, Anita Morjani is one in particular, who talks about how she sees how everything that happened, everything she did, whether she had judged it as good or bad, was absolutely perfect, and it was
Yes.
exactly as it needed to be. And I think that is an element that is innate to all of us, the judgment element that really
Absolutely.
keeps us in that state of being in separation.
Yeah, and I think that so many people, whether they acknowledge that they have this fear or not, I think people in the spiritually awakening world, and people in general, who are not intentionally on a spiritual exploration, I think that they have an innate kind of fear about what they're going to learn about themselves that they don't want to face. They don't want to face the judgment that they may discover, or these parts of themselves that they fear that they're not going to like, or that they're going to feel bad about. And what happens in the really deep states is that you realize there's such compassionate information coming forward. And I'm sure Anita would validate that when you realize these things about yourself, you realize it in a state of such compassionate understanding. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
we're not accustomed to feeling that towards ourselves.
No.
A really
Right.
deep, compassionate acceptance of who we are, how we've been. And for me, in the awakening, that is part of the beauty of the mystery, is that we realize we have this capacity to be so beautifully loving and compassionate towards ourselves if we would just allow ourselves to be. But
Right.
we have this fear or a kind of a block
Mm-hmm.
to get to that level. And I would encourage anybody to really just take that leap of trust and do the whatever they can to really find that space within them of exploration that is really deeply honest, because they'll discover that they have so much compassion about within themselves that they didn't even know.
Yeah. Do you find that when you are giving this talk, to people, do you find that, or how is it received? Do people know what to do with that? Are they a little confused? Or does it just open doors of possibility? They go, oh, of course.
Yeah.
How do you find it's received by people that hear it?
it's been completely mind-boggling, honestly.
Hmm.
I just started my tour on the West Coast a couple weeks ago, and so the first three audiences, it was fantastic. I mean, you could see people go, "Oh, yeah," but then the next question is, "So how do you do it?" And that's really great to hear, but how do you do it? And I caution people against making that initial leap, because the first step to really thinking about divine love and being the state of divine love is it's not even worth trying to figure out how to do it until you know that you're absolutely willing to do it, because the willingness, if you're really deeply at a deep level still blocked and you really don't want to do it, then you're just going to be on a treadmill trying to do things. The inquiry of whether you're willing to be within your own being, unconditional about everything, equal about everything, whether you're willing to allow everything within you to be free to express as it is, whether you're willing to really incorporate everything in a state of unity and oneness within and accept everything unconditionally, that if you deeply question that, your first answer will be, "Oh, yeah, sure, sure, sure." And then you get a little deeper and you go, "Actually, I kind of like being righteous, and I kind of like judging that politician, and I kind of like," so you start to realize, actually, I have enjoyed being, these things.
Yeah.
It's how
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've gotten emails already from people in my first talks, because I said, before we get to the stage of getting the resources to do these exercises, the first exercise is questioning your willingness. And across the board, people are like, "Well, I'll be damned. I really, it's true. I really
Right.
don't, I'm not ready." But just questioning whether you really truly want to be unconditional with everything about yourself, if you really want to consider everything within yourself, your judgment, your self-loathing, your blame, your hatred, your lust, whatever it is, if you really aren't willing to consider everything on an equal basis, then it's pointless to go forward and try to find resources to do anything more. The first thing is recognizing the state where you are now and owning that. And in and of that self, there's beautiful information that comes forward that
Hmm.
can help you see who you are. And that's the first level of exercise, is the inquiry of willingness.
Right. Right. You know, that actually is interesting because the process seems to be whatever your story is or whatever it is that you believe about where you are right now, and which is point A, and how do I get to point B, and what do I have to intend in order to get there, and how do I have to pray in order to get there, make sure I'm using all the right words, and I don't want to
Yeah.
limit myself in any way, and
Mhm.
it really isn't about examining who you are in this moment, and actually loving yourself in this moment. It's
Mhm.
about, I just got to get to point B.
Absolutely. I hear that all the time. People are trying to get over there, over there, over there. And the first step is to realize where you are right now.
Right.
And I've seen very well-regarded spiritual teachers doing that very thing in like private conversation, and it's really pretty shocking to see that there isn't that even in the most earnest among us, um, there's some kind of fear that we don't want to really deeply stop and look internally right here, right now. And
Right.
again, we're missing out on a
Hmm.
really deeply compassionate understanding of ourselves by just constantly trying to move forward.
Yeah.
And so this is where we are. I think we're at a beautiful state of learning the now, right?
Yeah.
Learning and seeing ourselves fully in that space, because that's where all the information is about us.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful inquiry.
Yeah. Well, and it definitely uh, seems to be something that is just opening more and more, and awakening is happening more and more, and people are coming to this place, just um, well, maybe it's because I'm paying attention to it, but it just seems, well beyond what I thought it was, even 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, and I think we see it everywhere we turn now. I think a lot of people are really focused, especially because we're in a political season. They're really focused on all the crap that's going on that's, seemingly insane without a
Yeah.
realization of, why we might be experiencing all of that right now, that we're
Right.
having these blasts of momentum that is now expressing.
Yeah.
And it is, as I tell people this all the time, it is not that sort of cry of insanity that's important for us to focus on. It is our reaction to that cry of insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Are we meeting it with the same level of energy that we have historically done of judging it or wanting it to go away? Or are we meeting it with an unconditional state of divine love? And that makes all the difference in the world, because that kind of really explosive kind of energy loves friction. It loves things to push against. And if
Mm-hmm.
we give it nothing to push against, it has no life, it has no energy, it
Right.
has no choice but to be absorbed then into the divine field. And
Yeah.
that's what we can do.
Right.
It's totally what we can do.
Yeah. Well, I think just noticing what some of the reactions are out there to the political climate, that we still have a ways to go.
We
And-
do, but it's. I think it's really. I think there's so many. I mean, if we can also look at the behind the scenes, we can look at the Bernie Sanders kind of movements and the
Mhm.
Occupy movements and these other things where it's a totally different kind of momentum that's
Yeah.
happening with people that's really based in a much more collaborative and community-driven kind of way. And at the base, it is driven by a desire for more freedom, more equality, more oneness, that sort of thing.
Right.
So there is this undercurrent of momentum that is also happening that would naturally push these other things to the surface,
Right.
and then we get the real levels of insanity.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's a good thing if we can wrap our head around it possibly being that.
Well, it is, and one of the ways that I've heard about, I wonder what you think about this, to just step far enough away that you can get some perspective, is to recognize that what you're seeing out here is just simply a projection or a reflection of your interior world, of what you are creating inside. And all of it is really there to illuminate you and who you are. And so if that's what it is, and then you're looking at that, and you can look at that without judgment, and you can look at that in a way of unconditional love. So it seems like maybe a stepping stone towards getting there.
Well, the what we see in the world around us is a reflection of the collective consciousness, right?
Right.
So if we really deeply, honestly look into our own being and we think, what am I contributing to that collective? We can never expect that collective reflection to give us something back that we're not giving it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we are not willing to give to the collective a state of true divine love, then we can never expect it to be reflected back to us.
Right.
And so if we are within our own being, filled with judgment, filled with fear,
Mm-hmm.
filled with inequality, filled with oppression, filled with separation, this is what we will continue to see in our world.
Yeah.
So it is our responsibility, if we want to see a world that looks different within our own being, we must know that our contribution needs to be what we seek. This
Right.
is the old statement of be the change you wish to see.
Yeah.
It has to be that way. Otherwise, we're just fighting a mirror.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful and well said. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I really, I am very keen on reminding people about all the beauty that's also happening. While all of this other stuff that seems insane is going on, we also have a whole world changing before our very eyes. The fact that you and I are in different states uh, seeing each other on video, that people around the world can watch us do this.
Mm-hmm.
What an amazing world we're living in at this
Yeah.
time. The
Right.
fact that you and I are talking about unconditional love, about a world that's awakening, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, what, 20 years we couldn't, 20 years ago we couldn't have done this, and we wouldn't have done this 20
Right.
years ago.
Yeah.
We would have been talking sort of on the underground about unconditional love. Here it's,
Exactly.
it's part of common vernacular now. So the things that are going on, that are the youth that are coming along, the changes in what we've seen in our world in terms of equal rights and all of it's just fantastic. And I have a very dear friend who this week is turning 97 years old, and I'm going to her
Oh,
birthday party right after this. Um,
wow.
I was just talking with her day before yesterday, and she she said, when I talk to you, I just feel like the world is so filled with good things. And I said,
Oh,
good, because it
good.
is. This is
It is.
good.
Yeah.
So I really
Bless
encourage
her
people
heart.
to you have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a choice about
Yep.
the perspective that they take. You
Yes.
can have the perspective that everything is a problem to be fixed. You can have the perspective of the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And you can also have the perspective that there is really beautiful momentum going on in our world. And when you get the perspectives of the things that really resonate deep within your soul, you feel that sense of pulling forward and excitement and rising up. You
Yeah.
can't help but feel it
Right.
because that's truly our nature coming forward, that
Mm-hmm.
divine love rising up within us.
Yeah.
So I really am keen on trying to get people to think a little broader about the things that are happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, there's an undercurrent of that exact thing happening.
Yeah, being led by people like the near-death experience community and teachers that are really getting out to reach people about encouraging direct experience and direct knowing and coming out with your secrets and all
Mm-hmm.
of this sort of stuff. When I first came out, I heard somebody say to me, and I've only had one person say to me, you shouldn't be telling your mystical stuff. This is like against. People can perceive it as an egoic kind of pride sort
Ah,
of thing. I said, yeah, well, what would have happened if Jesus had never said anything or Buddha had never said anything or
right.
whatever? I mean, there's a reason why it's important that we tell our truths.
Yes.
And so if anybody tries to tell you that you need to keep quiet about things, we need to figure out where that's coming from before we take it as a anything kind of relevant, because it's not.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and my feeling on that is, hearing the words of, near-death experiencers, people who've had amazing experiences, is that I think what it does is it opens doors of possibility for people who are very focused on their routine, very focused on what's happening in the third dimensional realm, and I think it just helps them see that actually other things are possible than what they're taking in and just observing on a day-to-day basis. And for that alone, I think it's incredibly important to tell the
Yeah.
stories.
And then if you tell your story and then later on they hear somebody else say something, if you hear it from just one person, I don't know, but
Mm.
then you start hearing it again or again, or you start seeing it on the
Yeah,
New York Times bestseller list, those books now that are coming out about direct experiences,
absolutely. Yeah.
start hearing it on internet shows, etc. And by the way, I want to mention on that note, how important shows like yours are, Karl, because I suffered immensely being very lonely in my journey and not having community that I could find, not knowing the language that people use about mysticism, about not having resources that I could go to find community. And so people like you bring very important information out to the public sphere. And I really thank you and bless you for all that you do, because you provide an important service for our world at this important time in our awakening.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Bless your heart. I I do it because I find it exciting. I really do. And
Mhm.
the experiences that people are having and the direct experiences they're having, I haven't had them myself, but I don't know. I can hear the stories over and over again. I'm very compelled by them, and I
Mhm.
really really want to share them because I want other people to think they're cool too. So
Yeah, well, you're an
so
important vessel for the rest of us to sort of come through. And so good on you.
Well, thank you. Well, bless your heart, Mary. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today and share your story and share some of the wisdoms that have come through this experience for you.
Thank you, Carl. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure, truly.
yeah.
Let's do it again sometime.
I would love to do this again sometime. Absolutely. I'm wondering if you've got Skype over in India.
Well, yes. Now the
Ah,
quality is depends on the day and time of night. I did an interview on another show, Buddha at the Gas Pump, and I had to do that interview starting at 1:30 in the morning
oh my.
because that's when the internet was best, and
Right.
so it was kind of a funky. Even that was a
Yeah.
little iffy, but
A bit
yes,
dodgy.
I do have it, and it's like everything else, it's getting better bit by bit by bit as there's a greater demand. So. And people can check out my website if they want to see where I am this year on my tour. It's unwittingmystic.com. And that's the name of my book as well. And I would love to see people. I'm mostly on the East Coast. I have 3 talks in Michigan coming up in September. And then I'm all along the Eastern Seaboard from Virginia up through Vermont. So I would love to see people there if they want to come and meet me. I would really like to meet some of your audience.
Wonderful. And I know that they would love to meet you too. So
Thank you.
thank you for being here. And so that is Mary Reed. And it was just a joy and such a pleasure to have her be here with us. And you can find her book. We actually have it on our website too, and we're linked to her website. So if you go to streamingforthesoul.com and click on Superpowers, you'll find a spot where you can get more information about Mary. It'll take you to her website, and you can also find her book. So thank you for being here with us today for this episode of Superpowers. And remember to go out there and experience the extraordinary. Okay, and we are